one of the standouts when you look at the data is just how good Jackson's race runs were. As soon as you move to the elite category and you're in that dynamic, things do change. That race run is like indicative of the future. The junior men are so close to the elite men now. GBR, Great Britain, has taken a slight dive. And my hunch is that electronic suspension might take a little back seat in the next few years.
Chris Kilmurray, welcome back to the Downtime Podcast. It's been a little while since the end of the season. I trust you've had a beautiful, relaxing time and you've just had your feet up for the last 8 weeks, right?
Oh yeah, I've no renovations, no chores around the house, no kids, no endless emails, no endless everything. No, I've just been chilling, yeah. Literally horizontal for 2 months, yeah.
I thought off-season was supposed to be quiet, but for some reason it doesn't feel like it has been for anyone this year.
Now, when you're a coach, off-season's on-season. And in-season is kind of on and off. So there you go.
No rest for the wicked, mate. Well, we're going to wrap up the 2025 season via the gift of some statistical analysis that you've been working on over the last week or so. I think you've
over
got
the last week, he says. My life is stats and data. This is my life. This is my opus dei, whatever they call it. My lifetime work is just going to be delivered in the 2025 World Cup Wrapped with Downtime Podcast. #.
Let's do it. Get it out there. You've got some opening stats that you want to hit us with, I think, to warm us up.
Yeah, well, I suppose I didn't know. I had the idea about the old World Cup Wrap thing, and I was like, I have so much data that I gathered throughout the season for my own kind of performance needs and for the athletes, and then for my own nerding and just my own general, I won't say pleasure, but moderate excitement that I get from gathering a bit of data. And it's useful sometimes, because if you don't gather it and keep it to yourself, then you're constantly trying to reference other sources, and you kind of like, they may disappear, they may not disappear, whoever takes over the series, whoever does X, Y, and Z, whoever builds the track. So I've kind of gotten to the habit the last 4 or 5 seasons of gathering my own data, keeping things stored away in different areas, trying to centralize it as best I can, but then realizing that programs like Microsoft Excel are not great for centralization. So eventually we need to take a step up and beyond and above. But before that, I said, you know what, actually I have so much data saved that could be quite interesting, especially as the sport's kind of shifting relatively quickly season on season, it seems like at the moment. So I said we might as well share a few bits and bobs. So yeah, I don't know, where do you want to start?
Well, you had like a chart with some overview, like high level stuff from this season, right? Like biggest winning margin, smallest winning margin, this kind of stuff. Like give us just some of those like highlight stats.
Yeah, so for the wannabe nerds that aren't quite nerds just yet, what we'd call them is descriptive stats. So the real basic statistics stuff, so means and averages and standard deviations. Real boring, dull stuff. But average winning times for every category, total winning time, and then largest and smallest winning margins. So in elite men, the average winning time in 2025 was 3 minutes 13 seconds, 0.299. Elite women was 3:53. So quite a substantial gap there between elite men and elite women. And that was primarily because of a couple of races like Léger that were super slow compared to your normal kind of time gap between the men and the women. Because during this season, actually, we had some time gaps between the men and the women. Valley in Lake Placid, Tana in Lenzerheide, I think it was. And Andorra, because it's a shorter track, that got actually pretty close, slightly closer than our kind of statistical average. Junior men 3:14.7.
So this is 3:13.3 basically.
3 essentially, yeah. So super close between the junior men and junior men and elite men. And what I actually did, I can't remember if I shared it with you, but what I actually did was took the perfect run, the perfect lap stats, which if people buy Hurley Birdie every year, they'll see my perfect lap kind of data in there. And I was like, right, there's definitely more depth in the elite men's field than there is in the junior men's field, as we can see, especially because somewhere else stats are coming hard and fast. But I think I worked out that I think 75 of the available 90 podium spots, 85 of the 95 sector wins for 2025 junior men's came from Asa Vermette and the 2 Alrans.
That's insane, isn't it?
Which is insane. So almost all of them, essentially. So obviously the depth in the elite men's category is just as you'd expect. Professionals for years and years and years. Is a little bit more. So perfect lap wise, the elite men have a slightly larger advantage than that, couple of seconds. But when you go just off your average times for race wins, the junior men are so close to the elite men now. But like we saw when we talk about the Alrans and Asa, getting the majority of the sector wins. So when you chop up the track into its 5 kind of key pieces that you use for the TV timing, it's those handful of riders that are really the ones shining through. But luckily for the depth of the sport and the field and all the fans, the Kiwis, Tyler Waite and Ollie Clark coming through, didn't get a whole pile of sector wins themselves, but were very, very close a lot of the time, especially Tyler Waite, who got himself 7 podiums, I think. And then we got like kids like Jonty Williamson, who are staying another year in juniors, who are just going to continue to mature and progress. And then finally, junior women, 3:57, so only 5 seconds off the average time of the elite women, which is really cool, considering the depth in the elite women's field has grown a lot in the last few years, and the time gaps between first place, third place, fifth place in the elite women's field are on par with how small the men's time gaps are this year at many events. There's still a bit more variation and variance in the women's category, but nowhere near as much as there was previously. Like when I started working at the World Cups, or my first kind of five years as a coach or whatever, the top 5 could be separated by, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds at times. The podium spread could easily 20 seconds, especially if Rachel had a really good race run back at her peak, Whereas now we're looking at in the elite women's category 2025 season, I think the average top 5 gap's about 7 seconds. So there's been an enormous shift in the women's category, especially. I think that this junior women's category only 5 seconds off in terms of their average winning time in 2025, that the junior women's category is just ready to destroy, I think, in the near future.
Good stuff. And then you got some largest winning margins, smallest winning margins, which is like a cool reminder of some of the racing as well. Yeah,
I think they're kind of like, not that they're outliers, but they're just interesting reminders of the narrative and the story from the particular events they happened at. So Ronan Dunn beat Martin Mays for the largest men's winning margin in Leger. So that was basically because Ronan had an insane run in conditions that a lot of people can't ride, insane runs top to bottom. And so the variation in sector performances, in race times, in ups and downs throughout the whole track was massive at that race. Some riders had amazing top halves, some riders had terrible bottom halves, like Tane, for example. Other riders were just up and down the whole way, and just the time leaked away because they were just constantly making small errors and mistakes. At least we forget at that race that actually Max Alran's winning junior time was faster than Ronan's time, even though that race had the largest first to second gap for the elite men. So that's an outlier event for sure. Like the junior men's time gap from first to third was huge. That was a wild event. So I kind of expected that was the biggest gap between first and second. But we have seen in the past at wet events where 2 or 3 riders have really, really good performances, and then the gap beyond them falls off a cliff, essentially. Gracie Henstreet's got the largest first to second margin in the elite women's field, and that happened at Ludenviel, second race of the year. And that story I only actually copped it recently when Miss Ben Summers shared an Instagram post, and it kind of jogged my memory. I was like, I remember something strange happened there. And then I saw Gracie's sector 1 time, and I was like, I remember now. So Gracie, as she had been quite a lot of times this year, was the slowest woman to sector 1. She was in 15th place. So she's not particularly great at some of the flatter, pedalier sections of track, and she's not particularly great at sector 1s at the moment. So when she is, we're in for a tough time, I think, because Gracie's going to be an extra handful from what she already is, So basically she was in last place at the first split in Ludenviel, and she went on to win the race by the largest winning margin of the season, so 3.2 seconds almost. So essentially from split 1 to the finish line, she beat Valley Hull by about 6.5 seconds, which is
incredible,
outrageous. And the majority of that came in the latter half of the run. So when things got steep, you came out of that wood section underneath the gondola and you start working your way towards there's a bit of a rock, kind of natural rock step down, and then that long right hand berm where Thibaut Debrella had a huge crash breaking a handlebar a few years ago. That whole area, she just dominated the women's field and pulled back enormous chunks of time. And some of the other women who were in the top 5, Gracie put basically not between 8 to 10 seconds into them between split 1 and the finish line. So she was on that week, and I think surprised herself as much as she surprised the rest of us that day, And then Asa over Jonty Williamson in Lenzerheide. So Asa was at his very best, largest winning margin, 4.8 seconds almost, 4.784. So that was pretty stunning, to be totally honest. A stunning race for Asa, that one. 1-1 qualies, finals, backflipping qualies with the quali win. Largest winning margin this season, the whole lot. There's not really much more you can say about that weekend for Asa, I think. And then, junior women. Rosa Zierl beat Alita Osgaard by 9.5 seconds in Leger. But that was because Alita The last jump was basically unclearable for a lot of people, especially in the women's categories in Leger, because of how sloggy and slow the motorway section was coming in towards the finish line. And Alita just made a small kind of miscalculation under the old stress of a race run and went outside the pole instead of between the pole and the track, which was super easy to do because that whole section was not designed to be ridden around. It was designed to be jumped, and jumping was definitely slower. So Alita made a big mistake there, and she actually probably could have won the race. But in the end, we got ourselves the largest winning margin of the season between Rosa Zierl and Alita Oscar. But what that shows us is that actually the only time we had this huge winning margin in the junior women's category was when there was a real strange incident, like Alita going out of the course, having to walk back around the pole, come back into the track, hike up the jump, all of those things. So actually the rest of the season, Alita and Rosa were just neck and neck battling it out. It was phenomenal. I think if you go back through the deeper stats, like the smallest winning margin for the junior women's category was in Val di Sole, between, again, Rosa Zierl in first place, Alita Oscar in second, and that was 0.6 of a second. And it's been pretty rare the last 5 to 10 years. Let's say since Valley's junior women's dominance, it's really, really rare that we got ourselves a really tight women's race and a junior women's race and a really regularly, narrow gaps between first, second, third, the podium, whatever else. And that's all we had this year long between Rosa, Alita, and then between Eliana Hulsbosch when she was on form as well. So I think the junior women are maybe the highlight of the year for me in some ways, I think, to be honest, And then smallest winning margin junior men was the brothers, Till over Max, half a second in Val di Sole again. And both of them made crucial errors in that race. Max's error probably cost them the win, and the win would have probably only been a tenth of a second. And Till made a mistake lower down the track than where Max made his mistake, but managed to do it in a spot where he was carrying more speed, so it was less consequential. So, but the boys, half a second between them. And I'm really interested to see how Till goes next year. Obviously, some of the most interesting riding and racing of the year from Till. As fast as his brother, potentially up to the halfway. I think Max stole the limelight all season long. But if you look at the data between Till and Max, up to the mid-season break, both of them had 2 wins. And Max got his second win in qualies because they didn't get to race in Andorra. So actually, up to that point, Till was leading the series coming into Andorra. 2 wins on the trot, made a huge mistake in qualies right at the finish line, same place Gracie Hemstreet crashed actually, was on pace for second place or third place in qualies, which would have been top 3 in the overall results for the weekend, which would have kept him the leader's jersey and that momentum going into the mid-season break. So there's so many little stories that work out between those 2 brothers, and I think Max, probably rightly so with his performance at World Champs, with his performance in Leger, with his overall just kind of semi-dominance of the series. Max stole the limelight a little bit, but really, if you dig into the stats and the data, they're a little bit closer than it looks like. Till just made bigger errors, or his errors were more consequential. So that half a second gap, smallest winning margin of the season in the junior men's category is the brothers. And I think for the foreseeable future, there'll be lots of half a second gaps between those 2. So there you go. And then the next 2 are the smallest gaps we've had in racing in a long, long time. I think the Tanya Seagrave, Nina Hoffman, Lenzerheide gap of 600ths, well, just about 700ths of a second, 0.069 was tiny. And like you and I talked about on that track, everyone knows it so well in the elite categories that small gaps are pretty common. And then the Goldstone Bruni gap in Leogang, which I'd actually forgotten about until I started compiling my end of season stats, but that was less than the women's gap. So you're looking at 600ths of a second. 0.059 of a second between Goldstone and Bruni, and at the speeds you're traveling coming across the finish line in the Leogang, I think it's like 64 centimeters or less, so a bit of a wheel basically is what was between them. So but again, those 2 tracks that are just kind of, we won't say rinsed, but they're pretty rinsed now. They made for good racing, good riding. Lenzerheide more so because we hadn't been there since 2023, luckily. Leogang were going there every year, in and out, so it's hard to find those margins now, and it's to be expected that we have such small gaps. But I think in both categories you can see it was rare in the past to have gaps that small in the elite women's category, but now we've got, the largest and the smallest gaps between the male and female elite categories are very similar this year, and it's just a testament to the women, I think, the depth of field,
100%. Let's talk a bit about tracks. What do the stats say about track difficulty? Can you pick out like the hardest track from stats, or does it need a lot more than that?
It's tough. I tried my best I did a few different tortures of the numbers, from standard deviation, some Z scores, a few bits and bobs, most of it around track duration, track duration, steepness, that sort of thing. Leger was hard. Leger statistically was just slow for everyone, just because of how boggy it was, how long the track is, how easy it was to make mistakes that were pretty consequential time-wise. So when you throw it all together, you can see Leger is an outlier in terms of duration, how long it took everyone to get from the start line to the finish line, on what is typically a pretty fast track, you know, even though it's one of the longer tracks in the season and it has one of the highest vertical drops. It was a slow race. So straight away you're like, right, that's a hard race to do well. Whether it's actually difficult is a pretty subjective idea. And I think, like I said to you, if you ask the riders what was the hardest track of the year, they'd probably say Val di Sole still, just because of how difficult it is to ride as fast as you need to ride top to bottom. And for me this year in Val di Sole, we're going to talk non-stop for the next probably half an hour about the juniors, but for me, the performance of the juniors in both categories in Val di Sole, on how hard that track is, how many extra turns the Warner Brothers course crew added this year to slow it down a bit, to make it a bit less direct and a bit less gnarly compared to what it had been, especially 2021, which was the gnarliest ever, I think. You know, how well the juniors performed with limited experience in that track was pretty stunning. But I think all across the board, a lot of the riders would say, you know what, you know, Val di Sole is tough. Maybe one of the interesting outliers was that Le Tuile, you know, the highest vertical drop ever at a World Cup, like almost 700 meter vertical drop, 679 meters from start line to finish line, which is monstrous. You know, a good 200 meters more than a lot of the tracks this season, you know, well over 260 meters more than Poland, for example, a vertical drop. So another quarter of a track on top of it. High speed at the top, Tech and Strange in the middle. That sector 3 that Till Alaran destroyed was just hard to do, extremely hard to do well. So steep, so blown out, not much support in the corners. Got rough and physical near the bottom. The whole thing was just a proper, what everyone would say, a proper downhill track. But the time gaps were actually small. So the speed was high top to bottom and the time gaps were actually pretty small. So it was, strangely enough, on paper, the Tuile should have been a hard track, but the data doesn't say that. The data says it's just a typical track. So that's where you'd have to go to the qualitative side of things and ask the riders and see what they think, you know what I mean? Like, what's the reason that the riders managed to perform so well on what should have been a track, you know, closer to the Val di Sole level of like variance and difficulty. So that's where we need more than just the numbers, you know.
Do you think you could potentially see bigger time gaps on the Tuile as that track beds in and the riders have more experience there? Do you think some riders could pull ahead? Like, could it be based on a limit? You know, everyone's on a level playing field.
Yeah, potentially. I think my experience would say that at the moment, as it gets destroyed, depending on what they do in terms of maintenance and updates, and they're pretty motivated, I think, to do a good job maintaining it, but there's only so much you can do. I think short term, medium term, the next couple of seasons, the time gaps may grow a bit as the track gets destroyed and certain riders, certain teams figure things out better. And then it'll go the direction of the Leogangs and the Lenzerheides, where some of the gaps are quite small in the elite field, you know. Or you have these little brackets where you have really small gaps in the top 3 or the top 4 or the top 2, and then you have these jumps beyond that, because certain people really just had the whole package dialed for the weekend. So that's probably the way it's going to go in Le Tuile. We'll see some slightly larger time gaps in some spots, and then as the track really develops to baked in, destroyed, and there's less margins or there's less advantages to creative lines and creative riding and different tactical approaches or different whole kind of race week strategies, then yeah, we'll see in the near future. But my hunch is big time gaps, and then it'll whittle down to small time gaps, you know. And then if we get a wet Le Tuile, like we saw when we had a wet Leogang, especially World Champs year, when Reese destroyed everyone and Camille Balanche destroyed all the women's field, especially in the lower woods. Like, if it gets wet and muddy, those lower woods will still decide things in Leogang. You know, it'll be a clear race of two halves. So will Le Tuile be the same? Like, we just had a bone dry baked Le Tuile, like too dry for the first time out. So if we get a real muddy, difficult Le Tuile, we get poor visibility at the top, like, well, how does that impact? Luckily for us, downhill is just so variable in terms of the environment. So the stats will, like we saw with the Leger stats, the stats will follow suit. The stats will play second fiddle to the conditions, you know.
Yeah, fair. Let's talk juniors versus elites, because there's, you know, a lot of chat, especially about the male side, because that's the biggest group moving up this year. I think in women, it's just Ellie Hulsebos going up into the elites. But we've got a good chunk of Max, Asa, Till, Tyler all going up.
Ollie Clark.
Yeah, Ollie.
A couple of others too who have totally kind of went under the radar in terms of performances that could bloom slightly late. Yeah, Bodie Burke, hard to know. Bodie was doing really well. Obviously, had that insane run. Similar to Gracie, performed super well in the lower half of the track in Ludenville and then knocked himself out in a pretty disgusting crash in Val di Sole a couple of races later. So, yeah.
What does the data say? Have you got like much evidence? I mean, looking at the surface level, we've seen Max, Asa and Till, I think, all beat the elite male times on occasion this year in fairly similar track conditions. But digging any deeper, is there more to indicate where you think some of these guys could stack up?
Yeah, really, really interesting, because as soon as you move to the elite category and you're in that dynamic, things do change. It's not just as simple like transplantation, just throw them in there, they'll be fine. They haven't raced against the elites ever, really, with the exception of Hardline and a couple of like US nationals or French champs or whatever it's going to be for depending on where the riders are from. So there's bigger contracts, there's bonuses, there's more media attention. You're in that group, you're lining up with your previous idols who you're now beating regularly or not. You know, there's all these little details where all of a sudden the pressure is different, the expectation is different, and the entire system you're part of has changed because now you're a part of it. And it's like sounds a little bit wishy-washy and airy-fairy, but that's the reality. So my hunch is that a lot of these kids are going to do really well, no problem, because it is genuinely a different generation. Just as Jackson and Jordan did really well, really, really well straight away, especially Jackson. It's just this new generation. I think the media and other fans and stuff have pinpointed it already. It's like better bikes from a young age, better tracks from a young age, social media to learn from, riding with really good riders of various ages and abilities from really young ages. Like all of these kids have been pretty good for at least 4, 5, 6 years. So they're not coming in with an insane amount to learn to elites. What they need to learn is like polishing and fine tuning. So I think we're in for some ups and downs, guaranteed. They won't just come in and just wipe the floor with everyone. And, you know, the current crop of elite men especially just won't let that happen. But they're going to change the dynamic, and they themselves are part of the shifting and changing dynamic. So it's going to go both ways, you know, and there's going to be a lot of unknowns to figure out, and probably a few little strange things are going to happen where we're like, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect, you know, Max Alleran to win by 6 seconds this season, but he has, you know, or I didn't expect Asa to wipe the floor with everyone in those 2 sectors of track, but he did. And then vice versa. It's like, I expected so-and-so to qualify easier, not go to Q2 in their first race, you know. So we're definitely going to have the narrative, the stories are going to be up and down, but the overall trend is going to be no problem for the vast majority of them, you know. I think, and then those riders that are super, super fast, but had their inconsistencies and weren't quite on the sharp end in terms of sector wins and race times, like Ollie Clark, who had a race win but wasn't quite there in terms of like elite winning times week in, week out. You know, will Ollie just come good straight away and absolutely smash it and be a top 5, top 10 guy every weekend? Will he have his struggles to qualify? We just don't know until we get there, you know. And I think, like I said to you briefly, in the elite women's field, luckily we have Camille Balanche and Monica Hrasnik retiring, and we have those extra 2 spots for qualifying, because otherwise we'd be looking at probably, you know, 16 or 18 fast women to qualify the 15 spots. You know, whereas previously qualifying last year, this season it was relatively tough at times to qualify, you know, straight through clean Q1, those 10 spots. But previously that, it wasn't really as big of an issue. It was kind of like, I'll get to the finish line and we'll be okay. That's done and dusted. That's an instant shift in the space of basically 2 seasons. The elite women's category, it's like it's done. If you want to qualify now, you have to go out and qualify, you know.
That's cool. It's really cool. I saw a plot that you'd put together. I think it was like consistency versus finish position or something like that for the junior men.
Junior men, yeah.
Based on that, Asa looked like, you know, the biggest threat, perhaps. Like he had a pretty consistent season. He just maybe didn't have quite the standout elements that maybe Max had that took him that little bit above the rest in people's eyes. Yeah, I don't know why. So I think I did a big analysis on the junior overall results, the junior sectors, all of the junior data, because the categories are so interesting, because they're all moving up, because I work with a few of them. I was like, right, I need to do a better job at this. And you'll see lots of comments on social media, especially because it's easy just to drop a shady comment on social media that so-and-so is the best and so-and-so is not as good as you think. Or people have national allegiances or whatever they have. They like or dislike whoever for whatever reason. And I was like, Asa got a little bit of like, he's not as good as people say he is type comments occasionally. And I was like, And then obviously closer to the end of the season, he really proved just how
how fast he can be. And his whole season could have been different if he didn't have that crash in Ludenville. He crashed in Poland, he crashed in Ludenville. You know, he only finished 3 seconds off the win in Ludenville with probably 6 seconds spent on the floor. So his whole season could have been a touch different if the momentum had shifted in his way from that second race onwards. But, you know, he came really good at the end. And I was like, actually, if you look at the consistency here, he had 8 podiums in a row. So once he got the 2 crashes out of the way, he was on the podium every single race. So he had 8 podiums, Max Alran had 7, and Tyler Waite had 7. So the consistency from those kids and juniors. Till Alran had, you know, less podiums, but he had 2 wins and some big speed and some big ups and downs, and a couple of mechanicals as well. But, you know, once you graph it out, so you graph out how regularly you finish high up in the standings, Asa was top dog. He was the most consistent in the top 2 all season long. So yeah, I think in terms of like, to be that consistent anyway as a junior, whether you're Max, whether you're Asa, whether you're Tyler Waite, is phenomenal. And then to be that consistent, that fast, with the fastest time of the day occasionally, or close to the fastest time of the day, it's like, yeah, we're in for an interesting future. I can't wait, really, to be honest.
Yeah, the Asa result that I feel maybe went a little bit under the radar and kind of rightly overshadowed by the Goldstone Bruni battle at the end of the season was his Monson Ann run, right? Which was faster than Jackson's, and Jackson was, you know, pushed by one of the greatest riders we've seen in the sport to do an 11 out of 10 run, which he delivered on and Asa was still faster. Yeah,
and Asa was like faster in just a couple of key bits, which got him the margin he needed at the finish line. So like it was, yeah, if you compare them, if you do the helmet cam, because we have both GoPros out there, luckily. So if you do the analysis side by side, as far as I know, Warner Brothers, UCI or GoPro didn't actually produce a side-by-side helmet cam from the two, even though they exist. It's probably just sitting on my laptop, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, there was a couple of key lines actually where Asa just dominated, you know, and a couple of key spots where Jackson dominated. So it was like, in terms of size, shape, how they ride, the bike setup, all of those things, they are like night and day. As British people would say, chalk and cheese. And for the future of the sport, it's going to be super, super interesting, because there is this endless supply now of night and day different ways to win the races, and night and day different ways that these younger riders are maximizing their strengths and trying their best to minimize their weaknesses without stressing about their weaknesses. And, you know, previously there was this kind of like deficit approach to performance, which is a pretty kind of like an old school approach, and it's still really common in the sports sciences. It's like, let's measure things, see what your deficits are, let's improve your deficits, and then you'll improve your overall performance. And that may or may not be the case when, you know, push comes to shove. Whereas it seems this new generation of kids are just like, well, I really enjoy ripping corners and bouncing my way down the hill, so let's just do that loads. And that's just how they end up winning races, you know. So it's pretty cool to see. But yeah, Ace's race run in Mont Saint-Anne was pretty special. It was dialed. He had a couple of Larry moments, slightly less. Jackson had a few more visibly sketchy moments on camera as he was doing what he needed to do to win the overall in massive, emphatic fashion. Ace's sketchiest moment was slightly just at the edge of frame of the camera, just that Menar's rock hop gap step down thing in the lower woods, the last kind of wood section. So Asa could have come a cropper, just like Jackson could have come a cropper, but both of them managed to get to the finish line, and Asa was the fastest man in the day. And I think conditions wise, you know, near identical in terms of conditions, but the whole dynamic of what you're racing for, why you're racing, who and how you're racing was very different between the two categories, you know.
Yeah. We shouldn't have to wait too long for the first Jackson versus Asa showdown of the year, right? Because it looks like they'll both be in Medina for Hardline in like 5 weeks' time or something. So
yeah, it's going to come around quick. I'm just more interested to see what the Sam Hill, Aaron Gwynn battle pans out like at Hardline. That's what I'm there for. That's my generation, old school, you know. But cool to see. I'm super excited if Gwynny does go and race that, seeing as he's on the start list. We're really, really excited to see if Gwynny does race it, and I think he'll probably surprise a few people, you know. And the rumour is that he's focusing a full season on just racing World Cups.
Good on him.
Yeah, you know, less extracurricular activities and just a full race season, so I'm excited.
Me too, mate. Me too. Let's talk about rider consistency. We mentioned Asa there, but like, what do the stats say about the other categories? There's a crop of dominators in all categories. I think that's what the stats really, really say. Like, there's a huge depth in the field, and that's like visually, you watch it on TV, you can see there's just so many good riders. You know, especially you watch Vital Raw, you watch your clips here and there, especially just consuming all of the social media all week long. There's just so many amazing bike riders on good bikes, you know, looking amazing, qualifying regularly, doing great things. But the data and the stats point to
each category has its little cluster of high performers. So if we go like from the junior men, because we just talked about them, we've already mentioned, Max, Asa, Till, Tyler Waite, and Ollie Clark just kind of dipped off from mid-season onwards after his Leo Gang win. But those four guys, and Jonty Williamson too, he came good as the season went on. And obviously, like we said, first year lead. So it's those four guys that are really, really like standout. So Max Alloran had the most wins, 4 in the season in the end. One of those was from a quali, but that's neither here nor there. Ollie Clark, Asa, Max Alloran, all had 1-1s. So 1 qualies and finals, which is pretty cool. And they're the standouts there. And you go to the junior women category, it's Rosa Zeal and Elisa Osgard. Like absolute huge standouts. 4 victories apiece, so won pretty much nearly all the races. 8 podiums each, neck and neck. And both of them did 1-1-1. So qualies and final victory. And on the longest, hardest tracks of the year, Val di Sole and Mont Saint Anne's for Rosa and Elisa respectively. So they are, and they're first years as well, which is like mind-blowing. And Eliane Hulsbusch kind of got herself a bit of momentum, figured out her racing. I think had a few huge crashes earlier in the year, pushing hard, and she really, really managed to like rein herself in, deliver on her potential, and start to get a lot more consistent as the season went on. She's moving up to elite, so it's going to be really, really cool to see Syndicate having another elite woman and how she progresses and develops as she goes through her career. Because like, at least we forget, no matter how good these kids are, they're still kids, So, and then once we get to the elite categories, like we said, there's a bit more depth in the field, but there's still these standout performers that really, really just kind of, they're always there, no matter what you do. Like in the elite men's, for example, Amory would always be one of those, but because of his mid-season injury with the collarbone and some ups and downs, he wasn't there statistically wise. But if you look at the data, when Amory was operating with 4 limbs, there's a lot of green on the board. There's a lot of high performing sectors. There's a lot of high performance, full stop, from Amory. But because he got injured mid-season and a few other ups and downs, he wasn't really on the list. Well, obviously Jackson, our standout guy with 5 wins. First man since Aaron Gwynn in 2011, I think it was, to do that. So that's like, that needs 2 asterisks, an asterisk either side. That's some big stuff. To win 5 World Cup races in a 10 race series with the level of riders and teams and everything we have now is pretty special. It is really, really special for Jackson. And then podiums, Bruni has Goldstone has the most with 6, Bruni with 4, Henry Kiefer 3, and Amory with 3. So there's a lot of like depth out there, like we said, but there's those handful of guys that are really, really, really special. Like really, really special. And Kiefer had some big ups and downs. Went to Q2 a few times. Kind of looked like he wasn't going to deliver on his huge amount of speed you can see in practice for a lot of the season, and then all of a sudden you're like, Henry Kiefer has arrived. This is it. He's figured out what it means to be consistent, And there's certain sections on track, especially when it's flatter, requires a bit of grunt, and Henry's extremely good at that. He's a strong kid, and he's really come good from his world champs win in Fort William in 2023 to now. Those couple of seasons, he's done what a lot of kids haven't done, which is deliver on their potential from winning a world champs, and he's made it happen. And I think credit to the Canyon team for sticking by him, and just giving him that consistency in his support that he needed. From the satellite team up to the factory team now, it's like exactly what he needed. And then of course only 2 elite men did the 1-1, the qualies final, the Q1 finals, and that was Loic Bruni and Jackson Goldstone. They're the only 2 who managed to get it done. So, and I can't remember, I didn't do the quali stats, but between them, they won quite a few qualies as well between them. So Jackson less so, obviously he did a few trips to Q2, and I think maybe one of the standouts when you look at the data is just how good Jackson's race runs were, when Jackson's qualifyings and some of his practice performances weren't actually that great. And Loic mentioned it in one of his interviews he did post-season, was that he was quite surprised at times this year at how kind of like how many crashes Jackson had in practice, how sloppy he looked at times, or how kind of out of sorts he looked. And I think Jackson was really just trying to figure out what's best for him in terms of lines, in terms of speed, in terms of approach. And he was really finding the limits of tracks very, very quickly this year, Jackson. So, and more often than not, when it came to the run that mattered, which is the race run, Jackson managed to take that step in the right direction. I don't know if it was a step back, but the step in the right direction and execute some insane race runs. So I think that's a scary one for the competition, when he can have a nightmare in practice or a nightmare in Q1, and then just when push comes to shove, he gets it done, And then finally, my preferred category this year, potentially elite women. Most wins, Gracie versus Tanya, 3 apiece, which is cool. And that's like, Tanya will tell you herself now. I don't know what word it is, but she's been around a long time now. She's the elder stateswoman of World Cup racing. She feels like at this stage. Her and Miriam, and Gracie's literally the exact opposite. Just, you know, and I think Tanya sees a lot of parallels in her 2017 and 2018 wins when she won 3 apiece in those seasons. With Gracie's wins this year, they kind of, not that they come easy, but they come slightly unexpectedly and they rack up and you're like, oh, this is what I wanted and here they are type thing, you know. So for both of them to get, you know, to share the most wins in the season was pretty cool this year. How Tanya created those wins, the whole story behind it, her entire career up to this point, is such a contrast to where Gracie's at in her career. So it was cool that that's what we got. And then obviously Valley, most podiums by far, 8 podiums, the most consistent woman out there, the only one to do the 1-1 in qualies, Q1 and finals, the only lady to do pretty much all the stats really. she pretty much dominated everything except race wins. She only got the 1 race win, which went once YT had officially folded. I think once things had officially got a nail in the coffin, essentially, it took a bit of weight off Valley's shoulders, it seemed like, and she rode a bit freer and a bit more relaxed, and she probably would have had a winning performance or very close to it in Mont Saint-Anne, but got herself a puncture. So yeah, the elite women's category is pretty stunning. And in terms of podiums, Valley had the 8, and then Gracie and Tanya had 4. Nina Hoffman 3, Marion Cabarrot 3. So we've got that. What we've got in the elite women's category is potentially slightly more depth in the sharp end than the men's, it looks like, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. You know, we've got a lot of women that have a lot less weaknesses than they used to have, which is really, really cool, you know. So here we are. I'm excited for the future.
I am as well. And I feel like the junior consistency stepped up this year. Like juniors are known for being erratic, you know, like all in, crazy runs, exciting to watch, which is great, but not always kind of getting to the finish line necessarily. And there's definitely a few still doing that. But these top riders in like both the junior categories seem to be pretty insanely consistent this year, considering how limited they are in experience compared to, you know, your Goldstones and Brunies and Pirons and Seagrays and all these people that have got a lot of race laps under their belts.
Yeah, you got like what have the Alran's done, like 16 World Cups or something?
Yeah. Something
like that, 16. I wrote it down somewhere, I can't remember where I wrote it down. I won't shuffle my pages now to find it, but I'm pretty sure the Alran's have done 16 or 18 World Cups, depending on whether they actually race finals in each one. Amory's done about 115. So there's a bit of a difference there in terms of what you learn in 115 starts versus 10 starts or 15 starts or 16 starts, you know. So yeah, I think the consistency it's really, really interesting. And I don't think you can pinpoint single factors that go towards it. It's really, really just a special crop we have at the moment. But Rosa Zierl is probably one of the standouts in that. Aletha is really interesting because Aletha, at times this season in her race runs, was quite erratic. Like you said, you know, it's that kind of like, whoa, this is fast. Whoa, this is slow. Whoa, that was a mistake. But it's still fast. It's kind of like you could narrate it yourself the whole way down. She's just like flying down the mountain. And she's, not that she's lucky, but she's gifted athletically in terms of her size and shape. That, you know, she's got so much physical development still to do. So that's a scary prospect for the rest of the women's field. But you can see she uses her physical gifts that she has at the moment to her advantage and uses them really, really well to get herself to the finish line riding insanely fast. And then on the flip side of that, even though they have same number of wins, same number of podiums this year, Rosa Zierl is just like a delicate flower. Just doesn't put a foot wrong. It is phenomenal. The level of precision and calmness in riding from a first year junior girl on at 10 World Cups, the longest season we've ever had, on some of the most diverse and interesting and demanding tracks we've ever had. And Rosa just like operates. Literally the word is just operation. It's like she puts the coin in the slot machine and it operates to the finish line. It's phenomenal, like, you know. So, and quite a few times this year we were all like, occasionally watch, depending on the track, depending on the sections, depending on what we wanted to know, you will or won't watch the juniors, because obviously they're starting before the elite. So you get a little bit of an insight from the junior racing. Watch it on whatever platform you can access. And there's a few times this year we tuned in to see Rosa's run during or just after she went on to win a race, and you're like, wow, don't have anything to say, only wow, basically. So yeah, so all of those girls, I think the Aletha Rosa battle is going to be one for the ages in the future, and they race quite differently, and they've got, like we said, you know, chalk and cheese, they've got very different strengths and weaknesses. So it's, yeah, very similar to any future Asa, Jackson, Max, Till, whatever battles we have, where we've got some very different styles, very different approaches, very different likes and dislikes. It's developing in a similar way in the elite women's field. And historically, I suppose, you know, you kind of like when Rachel was dominating, or when Tracy Mosley was doing really well, or when Sabrina Jeannier or Anne-Cara Chausson was doing really well, a lot of the other women were like, right, what do I need to do to emulate this? You know, how do I beat her everywhere type of thing? Whereas now it is going to be a case in the elite women's field of like playing to strengths and weaknesses, you know, and building tactics and strategies around that, which is cool. It's really just nice for the sport to have that level of depth across all the women's categories.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so let's talk a bit more about sector stuff. Is there anything in there, like, are there riders that have been good at winning sectors, but maybe not been able to convert that into, you know, superior race winning results?
No is the short answer to that one, which is absolutely crazy. I did a good deep dive to the sector analysis, like especially after you asked me. And there's definitely standouts. There's definitely people like, you know, your Nathan Ponvien early in the season was super fast, got himself a really good result in Ludenviel, then had that huge crash in Leogang, which really set him back. So there's definitely a couple of riders here and there that you can see there's little flickers of green when you do your heat map on your Excel and you're an absolute nerd like me. There's little flickers of green here and there. But really the standouts was just how dominant that batch of 4 or 5 riders per category were. You know, like I said, I'll have to whip out the stats here for you again. I can't remember them off the top of the head, but you know, in the elite women's category, 57 of the 100 available sectors. So we got 5 sectors per track. You've got 10 finals for 100 sector wins. 57 of them were won by Hull, Hemstreet and Seagrave. 3 riders, so over half. You know, 85 were won by the 2 Alrans and Asa Vermette. 40 were won by Goldstone Bruni and Lucas Shaw. So maybe Lucas Shaw is the guy we need to talk about. We had a lot of good sector performances, especially the latter half of the season, but didn't get the win. And then Rosa Ziel, Halitha Osgaard and Eliana Hulsbosch had 70 of the 95 available wins. So pretty
crazy.
Yeah, pretty crazy. But Lucas Shaw is maybe one of the guys we need to talk about. Lucas like been on the cusp a few times. He's had those seasons 2018 when he was in the syndicate where we're like, Lucas arrived, and then just didn't like solidify, didn't really just get himself in there as a top 3 guy every week or a top 5 guy every week. He'd have those glimmers and then he'd be back, you know, in kind of what we'd call mid pack, and then he'd be back at the sharp end and then back mid pack, and he'd be like, what's up? But now Lucas, he's matured. That new bike they're on has helped the entire team. As you can see, fastest team of the year, essentially the most podiums, not the most wins, but the most podiums, or joint most podiums at Muckhoff, I think. So that new Canyon's really, really helped them without a shadow of a doubt. And Luca, especially the latter half of the season, a couple of key sectors that were flatter, but even on the sectors where he's not historically Luca's super strong when it's pedally and pumpy and jumpy. You know, the pink bike's favorite comment is BMX background, but in this case his BMX background is a genuine. So he's phenomenal at that stuff, and he's shone yet again, especially Lake Placid and a few other places. But there's a few other sectors too where he was really, really strong, and he was really, really strong throughout the season. You know, his average sector position was 12th for the whole season. So when you consider Goldstone's average sector position in finals was 13. Shaw was, you know, slightly more consistent than Jackson was, but Jackson's better sectors would have just been night and day better. So, you know, had bigger gaps for a P1 or a P2 in a sector over other guys. So, yeah, so Lucas Shaw is probably one to talk about in terms of your question for 2026. You know, what will Luca do in 2026? Has he learned enough? Has he figured enough? Does he believe in himself enough now? You know, is that new bike just kind of the Goldilocks Frankenstein mix and match of kind of good enough at everything to be good enough everywhere? You know, is that what's helping, or is it just Luca has matured and that's what he required as a racer? Not everyone's a Jackson. Not everyone's a 20-year-old phenomenon, you know. So Lucas Shaw, let's watch this space. And then the most consistent guy of the season in terms of sector wins was Loic Bruni. 16 sector wins, 9 sector wins in finals, and he had the best average sector position of the season with 8.6 as his average sector position. So Bruni was the most consistent and probably would have improved those stats slightly, if not significantly, if he had started finals in Mont-Saint-Anne. My hunch is he would have got himself 2 or 3 sector wins, would have went all in, all out for finals in Mont-Saint-Anne, which sometimes for Loic doesn't pay off. We've seen before when he goes all in for finals and the bike isn't quite where it needs to be, he actually has a pretty average finals, but it can also go the other way when he dominates. So Bruni's the consistent kind of standout for the elite men in terms of sector performances this year. So the big story, and Loic knows it himself, is what's Loic's 2026 going to look like, you know. I know some of Loic's good friends, Loris Vergier especially, is kind of, I had a good chat to Loris, I think it was in Lenzerheide at our karaoke session in the FMD pits. You could have heard it from around the world. And Loris was concerned about the Alrans and the rest of the juniors, to say the least. So I'm not sure how concerned the rest of the French are, but I think, I think how easy some of the juniors make it look, it's definitely concerning. So what Jackson, Loic and Lucas Shaw's 2026 stats are going to look like in comparison to their 2025 stats is, we'll wait and see, you know.
Can't wait. And we had additional sectors accessible to teams, at least some of the races, I think, up to 10 like sector times, positions. What are your thoughts on all that? I know we spoke earlier in the year about it, and you were like, well, I'll be looking at it, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be putting it in front of athletes just yet. I want to kind of understand this a bit more before we baffle people with more numbers. Like, have you had a chance to dig into those extra sectors? Do you learn more? Does it give you much more insight?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. So we've always had, well, not always, but for a long, long time, we've had these extra splits, essentially. So the main splits, you got your four splits on track, split 1, 2, 3, 4. That makes your 5 sectors. And basically the transponder on the bike goes past the box that houses the split, and kind of completes the circuit on the floor and triggers the split time. So there can be a small delay, but we're still pretty accurate. The main splits are hardwired in. And then there is also a 4G backup, local kind of 4G backup system. So they're transmitted that way. These extra micro sectors, micro splits, we have had previously. So it's the same timing company though, for a long, long time now, since 2016, 15. Same timing company, Belgian crew. And Red Bull TV asked for these extra splits, and that's what they used to make the virtual straight from. And that's why occasionally the virtual straight on Red Bull TV's coverage would have been inaccurate. All of a sudden you'd see a huge jump as, you know, the time, and that would just be the time delay on the 4G, the kind of closed circuit system. So they're back, the micro splits are back, and now they're being a bit kinder to us, and they're actually giving us the micro splits. So during the Red Bull TV era, they never gave us the micro splits. They weren't accessible to the teams or the public, with the exception of them occasionally being on the Red Bull TV app, hidden away in a little kind of corner that I knew about on occasionally. But the way it was delivered, it meant you had to go on each individual rider on their webpage and copy and paste, and it was an absolute nightmare. Now we just get a simple Excel sheet with these extra data points. But it's just raw data. It's every rider in a massive lump thrown onto one sheet in the Excel. Away you go, how are you doing? So you can do some stuff with it. You can automate it. You can do what you want. I don't know how many teams are actually trying to do stuff with this. And like we said earlier in the season, it's just paralysis by analysis by paralysis. It's too much data if there's too much data. But there has been certain times this year when it's been quite interesting. You know, you can pinpoint a section of track. If you know where the splits are, you're like, okay, I need to know what's happening here. And then quite a few times this year, we've had a scenario where one of the splits didn't work. And if one of the micro splits didn't work, or if the end or the start of one of the micro sectors was actually a main split anyway, all of a sudden you get a lot less granularity in your data, and all of a sudden it's just not quite as useful as you thought. So you're up there, you're like, right, rider X was really slow here, and we have the splits, we'll figure it out. And then all of a sudden it didn't work. Or actually the split's in a slightly different place than you thought, and you're like, oh God, that wasn't the one. So what has proved super fruitful though is going after the race when you have a bit more time, and all the cards are laid out, and everyone's chickens and eggs and baskets have been broken, and the race is done and dusted, and you can see how people, you know, with more insight to the qualitative side of things, the story of the race, who did well, where and why, you know, what they felt, what the riders thought, you can go back to the data and be like, this is what actually happened here. And so I actually took a big deep dive into the Lake Placid data with 10 sectors instead of 5, and they were super well done. They were like evenly split the whole way down the mountain. The top half of Lake Placid was, you know, super slow and technical, got really blown out. More 90-degree corners in a minute of track than we've had in 5 seasons, I'd say. Gwynny gave us some good old tight corners up there. So there was a really kind of distinct, clear split. That track was, you know, a game of two halves. The bottom especially got really high speed and then got really pedally and pumpy. And there were some really, really key sections, like we saw with, you know, the likes of Lucas Shaw and Luke Meyer-Smith especially at the bottom were really strong. Some riders were really strong at the top, or like in Lucas' case, made a lot of mistakes at the top. So you could dig into the micro splits and really get yourself a some good insight into what happened. And I laid it out, just simple bar charts, graphs, colours, the usual kind of thing. And basically, the standout for me was Max Alran versus Lucas Shaw. So I threw Max in there because his time was good enough for top 3, top 4 in the elite men. And colour-wise, microsector-wise, it was basically 2 different races. So where Luca was slow, Max was fast. Where Max was slow, Luca was fast. And like, simple as that. So if you compared each rider's time to the best possible time in a sector, graphed it all out, you got just the wildest differences in colours. So what you can see is that riders are just, it's quite variable where people are fast and where some people are slow. And really, you need to be super, super careful to like, when you're doing analysis, when you're trying to help riders do their best, really, really careful not to chop the run up into too small pieces. Because you can see it's very, very hard to be extremely consistently perfect everywhere. And the smaller you chop up the track, the harder it is to really, really understand how or why people are fast, with the exception of some really basic, obvious stuff like missing a backside or casing a jump or, making a mess of a corner. So it's really insightful for the coaches and the staff and stuff, that like you need this constant zoom in, zoom out, this, this microscope, magnifying glass, telescope kind of dualism throughout your entire season. You need to be able to zoom in on the details and zoom straight back out again. And if you can't zoom out fast and zoom out well, you're probably going to lose more races than you're going to win.
Interesting stuff, man. What does the data say about team performance this year? Like, which team would you say has made the biggest leap forward statistically, and what do you think has driven that?
Yeah, I don't know. Statistically, I'm not so sure in terms of, there wasn't actually monster leaps made by any team. We lost a few teams that performed quite well in the past, like Dorval. So obviously really, really good, consistent, fast riders like Camille Belange and Benoit Coulange went on to pastures new. Some teams like Scott, for example, that got themselves some new riders, didn't really fully capitalise. They brought a new bike to the season, brought in some new riders, whole lot of new staff, and I think they're really in a building process, very similar to Trek Factory Racing. So 2 teams with big budgets, good bikes, big histories, didn't really capitalise on the talent that they have this year. So Trek and Scott were 2 of the standouts who were like, okay, you can see it in the overall positions, they're just not up there at the sharp end. But I think from my perspective, you're like, look, you've got the talent, the giftedness, the staff, and a constant work and iteration on those bikes. And I think more likely than not, both of those teams are going to come good in the near future. Then you've got kind of the flip side. You got teams that have always been successful, like Commencal Mukov, like Canyon Factory Racing, who were even more successful. And I think, I'm not sure if it's fully, directly, simply related, but both Commencal and Canyon in the great mountain bike budget cull of 2025 chopped all of their satellite teams basically to zero. So Commencal still have Commencal Les Ors, where Valley Hall is going next year, Commencal Schwalbe Les Ors, and their factory team, which is Commencal Mukov, but Canyon basically just have Canyon Factory Racing. So Canyon went from having 3 or 4 programs, having the Canyon Pirelli team, the Canyon Factory team, and Canyon FMD, to now having just Canyon Factory Racing. And they solidified there. And like I said, that new bike really, really helped them. I think the older Canyon Sender was an old bike. It was designed in, the latter half of the previous decade, essentially. And it wasn't a bad bike, but it's nowhere near as capable as their current bike. So that new bike, getting all the riders on that new bike, bringing Mahin Kabiru in, really, really helped them. And just, solidifying your budgets and solidifying your support and staff. So quite a few of the, for example, the staff that used to work for Canyon Pirelli came over to work for the Canyon Factory Racing team. So they had more people trackside, they had extra mechanics, they just had more staff and probably a simpler life. Fabian definitely had an easier life dealing with one team, not multiple. So I think that definitely helped them, and the vibes were high in that team. And not so sure for Commencal Mukov whether reducing the satellite programs had any direct impact on them, because they were quite a standalone, highly professional operation that's just iteratively, step by step grown from when the Ruffin brothers basically lived out of the back of a camper van, eating pasta from their parents, helping them mechanicking the bikes, 15, 20 years ago to where they are now. It's just been year in, year out. But that team has always been, the last few years, been super, super professional. And so I'm not sure whether the change in structure from Commencal and the change in budgets really impacted them, but they were just as successful as ever. So they had the most total wins, helped largely by the 4 junior wins. And they had joint most podiums with Canyon Factory Racing, so 17 apiece. So the 2 big programs, probably with some of the biggest budgets, definitely with the most staff and most riders, had the standout performances, and both of them helped a lot by their women and their juniors as well, which is interesting. I think if you go into the elite only stats, the team performances spread out a lot more. So then a team like Orbea FMD Racing shine a little bit more when you go elite only, because Tani had the 3 wins, Martin had a podium, we had I think 7 or 8 top 10s all in. No, maybe more, maybe 11 top 10s all in. So we had, some really, really good races with Orbea FMD Racing, and we were one of the ones that got culled in the Canyon budget cull, and it worked out for the better for absolutely everyone, for Canyon and for Orbea FMD Racing, and for Orbea especially, coming into World Cup racing at the sharp end like that, getting themselves a win. So I think it's an interesting time for teams. We can really, really see that the teams are like by design, by Warner Brothers design, I suppose. They're really, there's a few teams taking a lot of the share of the prizes and the share of the wins and the victories and everything else, and it's in many ways a good thing for a lot of the riders. A lot of the riders are getting better support medically, professionally, bike-wise and everything else. So I worked it out. We had 13 teams total recorded podiums, recorded wins this season. So out of your 20 kind of top factory teams, I think we had 28 teams in total, did we? With wildcards and stuff, 28 or 30 teams in total. And then 107 of the 120 available podiums came from the top 13 teams, which I thought was a really, really interesting stat. And you asked me whether, historically, whether that's a bit different or whatever. And unfortunately, the stream of Excel files I have isn't that good. But I thought as a stat wise, 107 of the 120 available podiums this year were from the top 13 teams. So super, super interesting. I think it's easy to be like, oh, there's not enough teams, there's not enough privateers, whatever. But actually to have 13 teams that perform well enough to get podiums relatively consistently is actually, it's pretty good. A lot of those, if you look at the support structures in those 13 teams, there's a lot of good teams out there now, which is cool for the riders, I think.
Yeah, definitely. How are the nations doing these days? Like if we look at kind of nation performance from a few years back versus now, are we seeing much change in where the talent is coming from?
France.
Stop. Done.
Full stop. France. No, downhill's a bit of a weird beast. I think when you think about it, we've only got 30 elite men in the finals. We're back up to 15, which is great for the women, but we previously had 10. And the juniors have, a qualification cutoff now for the women, which they didn't have before. So we don't actually have that many people starting on a race day, really. I think for a world-class event it is, but so it's really easy for 1 or 2 high performers per nation to skew the stats, which they often have. But I think France, USA and Great Britain, it's the standout nations. Australia still hasn't kind of got back to its previous, world beating best, and that may change in the not so distant future, hopefully. And there's definitely teams like High Country, which are from down that neck of the woods, that are trying their best to really give a lot of riders from the Antipodean part of the world the better support, and they're over in Europe for the majority of the year. But really, France still dominates. 2025, 9 of the top 30 elite men were French. That's an increase of 1 from 2021. So I compared 2021 stats to 2025 stats. Kind of like I've said to you many times in the podcast, the classic post-COVID. My COVID kind of cut off watershed. The sports took a change, took a turn since COVID. So we compared 2021 to 2025. So France has increased 1 spot in terms of the top 9 men versus 8 in the top 30 men. US has had a big jump, which I kind of saw slowly but surely happening when I used to coach Charlie Harrison, who was kind of part of that push. Beyond the Aaron Gwynn era, there was just so many fast American kids coming through, and there's more coming as well. And Asa obviously at the forefront of that. But between 2021 and 2025, we've had an increase of 3. So from 2 Americans in the top 30 up to 5 now. So and there's guys like Dakota who were injured this year, Austin Dooley who was injured this year, with both of them with pretty severe hip injuries. So I think there's even room, and Asa coming through to elites, and a couple of other kids who may come good in the not so distant future. So the USA is definitely one to watch in terms of your stats. The depth of talent in the USA, once you kind of look at it, it's there, but is a nation like France, because they're in Europe, because the kids are just so close to racing at that level all the time. Is that where we look for more depth? It's hard to know data and stats wise now. GBR, Great Britain, has taken a slight dive, which people have already said. I think you'll see comments and stuff from fans, and a lot of the time, in recent years, you would have had Oisin and Ronan from Ireland in the top 10 overall, and no British riders, British elite men's in the top 10 overall, which for me growing up, through the Steve Peat era, having no Irish downhillers at the sharp end of world level competition as an Irish person myself, to see and seeing so many people across the water in Britain dominating, it was always like, oh yeah, well, you know, the Brits just, that's the dominant nation in elite men's downhill. Whereas now, you know, in 2021 we had 7 British elite men in the top 30. Now we've only got 4 at the moment. And I think it will change again. It's just most things, like anything in life, it goes through cycles. And it just seems that the sharp end of elite men's downhill is cycling and trending in kind of not the best direction at the moment, but all it's going to take is for someone like Jordan Williams to figure out their racing and rack up 2 or 3 wins back to back and really start to get up to close to dominating the sport, and that just elevates the entire field from a nation. And we see that time and time again. And that's why France has been so dominant for so long, is that every season, every year, there's a French rider that's dominating. You know, Bruni's always there, but Loris has had his massive amounts of glory in recent years. Benoit Coulange, Anne-Marie Pierron, they're always just there or thereabouts. So if you're a French kid coming through and you're racing, you're like, look, anything's possible. Why not? You know. So I think that's where GBR is going to go. Ireland's taken a pretty decent leap up. I think we've been consistent, turning talent around. I think that talent conversion from, you know, Ronan and Oisin especially, that could have been top racers or could have not been top racers from their junior and their early elite careers, and now they pretty much are consistent top racers, which is really, really cool to see. So that's a standout one. And then we got the smaller nations: Austria, Canada, Belgium. I think there's some sneaky futures potentially from there. You know, is Martin Mays' downhill career going to really help Belgium just kind of get itself on the map in terms of downhill? We'll wait and see. Austria, it's basically got Andy Kolb and Valley Hull at the moment, but you know, is Andy and Valley's success pushing riders like Rosa Ziel, and is Rosa, you know, going to push her brother Anton, who's super fast young rider, and are we going to see there's this massive Austrian surge in the next decade because of Valley, essentially because Valley proved it's possible. You know, that's kind of how the sport is. It takes a couple of riders from a nation to prove what is and isn't possible. On the women's side, it's relatively stable, to be honest, because the field is smaller. Like we said, it is relatively stable. France and Britain kind of generally top the charts quite often. And they still have this year, you know, 2 riders in the top 15 for France and Britain, 2 riders in the top 15 for Switzerland too, which is cool. And New Zealand's probably one of the standout stories in terms of nations, for how small it is, for how far away it is. There's always been Kiwi riders that have been, you know, thereabouts, from Justin Leov to Sam Blenkinsop, John Kirkcaldy way back in the day. Probably I'd say 80% of the people listening don't know who John Kirkcaldy was. Cam Cole, the first elite professional rider I ever coached was Cam Cole. So there's always been these Kiwis that have been standout performers, but now all of a sudden we've got like lots of them. Tyler Waite, Ollie Clark, Lockie Stevens-McNabb, Eliana Hulsbosch, Sasha Ernest, who had a breakout 2025 season. So I think in terms of the podium stats, the nation stats, we've got 2 Kiwis in the top 15 elite women at the moment. And I think in the near future, we could be pushing towards 5, which for a country as small as New Zealand, as far away as New Zealand, to have multiple top performers in both elite categories is pretty, like many top performers per category is going to be pretty interesting. So I think to kind of wrap up the nation stats, without delving into the minefield that is the juniors, Austria and New Zealand, 2 very small nations with a lot of good terrain to ride on and some good histories developing. I think they're your 2 to watch in the near future.
What about suspension and tyre performance? We've obviously got a few brands competing in all of those. Like, what do the stats say on those? We're
going to ask the marketeers and the brand managers to switch off now as we discuss tyre and suspension performance. Obviously, we've got our 2 big suspension brands. We've got Fox Racing and we got RockShox. And as you can expect, they sponsor the majority of the teams, and they sponsor a lot of high profile riders. And like we said, if you get yourself a couple of high performing riders, like a Jackson, like a Max Alran or whatever, then you all of a sudden you're going to skew the data slightly, because you're going to rack up 4, 5, 6, 7 wins, whatever it is in a season. But nonetheless, winning races isn't easy. No matter how good you are, there's a lot of riders that want to win races. There's a lot of teams and a lot of riders that are trying. So we had, in terms of the 40 victories available in the World Cup season, so we're not counting world champs, just the 40 victories available across the 4 categories for the 10 World Cups, 21 victories on Fox suspension, 15 on RockShox. So I think, Tane, Jackson, Nina really pushed Fox in the right direction there, Asa in the end as well. And if you got the best riders in the world, you need to develop product that helps them or allows them to win. So obviously when we were talking about Fox and RockShox, we've got product that allows you to win races. So RockShox with 15, Fox with 21, Oland's with 3. So that's Bruni and Rosa Marie Jensen. Got the 3 wins for Oland's. I think Oland's definitely have the capable to do more. They just need their riders just to find that little bit extra. You know what I mean? It's so hard to win races when you got a couple of dominating riders per category, or a handful of dominating riders per category. And then Ollie Clark, SR Suntour on the Zero.
Yeah.
So I got the gearbox, got the lesser known suspension win and the gearbox win. So credit to Ollie Clark. He got all of the and Ollie Clark was on Michelin tires too. So Michelin's only win of the season as far as my stats go. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, Michelin's only win of the season as far as I calculated was Ollie Clark and Leo Gang.
Interesting. Yeah, what about tyres then?
Yeah, it was super interesting. The 2 big brands that sponsor potentially the most of the teams. Please correct me if I'm wrong if you're a fan nerd, or if you're a brand nerd, or if you work for either of the brands, but Schwalbe and Maxxis got the most wins between them. So Maxxis took the title with 18 wins by my calculation. So really helped there by, you know, the likes of Jackson, the Syndicate, and Canyon Factory Racing, who were, you know, big teams, big performers. 18 wins. Schwalbe came next with 15. So FMD, Canyon Muck-Off, and really, like, what you're looking at here is you're a mountain bike consumer. You don't have an allegiance to the brand. Try a Schwalbe on the front and a Maxxis in the back, and vice versa, and see what you think. You know what I mean? We're so lucky we've got some high performing, like how little punctures we got this year. You know, Lenzerheide was a standout for whatever reason. Lenzerheide, the amount of punctures, I saw more broken wheels, especially on spokes, in Lenzerheide than anywhere else this year, and also tire failures, but mainly actually wheel failures. But in terms of like the performance of what is such a key part of the bike for performance and for reliability, for the consumer to be able to buy what the racers race on, give or take, and for them to perform so well is actually phenomenal when you think about it. It's like the fact that I have a garage essentially full of what you can race on, which is crazy, you know, when you think about it. So yeah, Schwalbe with 15, Maxxis with 18, and then Continental and Specialized on 3 apiece. So I think you and I both expected Continental to have a few more. ASA getting the majority of those wins, Valley getting the other one by my calculation. I think all it takes for a tyre brand to get that extra few wins is for a Valley Hull for her season to go slightly differently, and all of a sudden we'd be talking about Conti having, you know, 10 wins, wrapping up kind of closer to the sharp end. But because few of your standout riders don't quite get there for the wins, you don't get the stats. So Conti with 3, and then Specialized with 3 with Specialized Gravity. No one else runs them. Well, some people do occasionally. There's an occasional bit of Sharpie happening with the Specialized tires, and then one for Michelin. So there you go. Although one of those Specialized tire wins may not have been a Specialized tire win, but we'll leave the stats. We'll leave them lie for now. We'll leave them lie.
Give us some thoughts on best weekend performances then. Like, out of all of the racing, statistically, which were the standout performances?
The juniors got closest to having perfect. So no one had a perfect weekend. Nobody won every sector of the race in the finals. So the 5 sectors, the 5 main sectors. If you talk about these micro sectors that now exist and may not exist in the future, you're probably now not winning the 10 sectors as the track gets chopped up into small pieces. But historically, people have won the 5 sectors and had the perfect weekend. And Valley Hull in one of the seasons came very close to winning. I think she won 9 of the 10 between qualies and finals in some of her more dominating years. And so no one came close this year, and the juniors got closest, with Till, Max and Asa all winning 4, and those 3 taking the other win from each other at their respective events. So Asa took it from Till at a race, Max took it from Till at a race, Till took it from Asa at a race, and Max, crazy. So the speed and the depth in that junior category, yet again, probably our standout stat chat. The juniors got closest. Rosa Zierl got super close at one of the events as well, as did Editha Osgaard with 4. I think 4 was the most as far as I remember. In terms of standout, consistent, amazing weekend performances, I mean, like 1-1s. When you win qualies, you win finals. So Valley's 1-1 in Lake Placid was pretty phenomenal. Tani's Poland performance was one of the best in terms of statistically, one of the best averages of sector performances across the weekend. I think an average of 2.4 in terms of her sector position across qualies and finals. And pretty starkly different conditions for qualies and finals, insanely bad conditions for finals, as we saw on TV. plenty of snow, as I experienced firsthand at the top of the hill. And that was an interesting race because like the top 3 gap, for example, was one of the biggest of the seasons. The top 5 gap was over 7.5 seconds to 5th place from Tahney's win, which we didn't see much of throughout the women's season. So in terms of like a pretty impressive weekend performance, first race of the year, a lot of unknowns, new bike, really consistent sectors, insane finals performance. You know, Tahney's Poland race was one of the kind of standouts. Jackson had more than a few throughout the year. Had some ups and downs in qualities, like we said, but Jackson's La Tuile finals, Jackson's Val di Sole finals, like there was more than a few. But time and again, we're kind of leaning back towards the juniors and going, wow, juniors. But like we already said, the depth isn't quite as deep in terms of like your perfect laps, stats and stuff. The elites are still faster. You know, across the board, you take 10 elites, 10 juniors, the elites are faster. So does that kind of change how we analyze the best weekend, the perfect race weekends? Probably a little bit, you know. Bruni had a really good one in Andorra as well. Bruni's Andorra performance, like those weekends where you need to win to keep your overall alive. You need to win because you're sick of Jackson winning. You need to win because you're, inverted commas, close to home, those sorts of things. For a guy like Bruni to kind of step up to the plate and just make it happen when he needs to make it happen because he wants to make it happen, they're impressive weekends as well. So yeah, so statistically there's definitely some shiny ones, like Tahney's performance in Poland, Gracie's performance in Ludenville with that insane 10-second turnaround from split 1 to the finish line, and then the juniors just murdering and dominating their way throughout the season, you know. And the juniors especially because, you know, we get to see them on TV. You compare like how Tyler Waite rides a bike to how a Max or Till Alran rides a bike, and it's so different. So when you're talking about like consistent performances like that, sometimes they're coming in very, very unique in different ways. So yeah, it's a cool time in the sport.
Yeah, and some insane comebacks this year as well. I mean, Amory's collarbone to being back racing in 8 or 9 days or something ridiculous, and later taking a win. And then Marin Cabarrou from a broken back to taking race wins. Again, just incredible what these athletes can do these days.
Yeah, considering how condensed, like Amory's broken collarbone came mid first half of the season. In the densest, we had 6 races in 9 weeks, a load of travel, everything else to go with it. He crashed literally on me. I was there last. I was waiting for him and Lloyd to come down last minute in practice on day 1, and Amory just takes off into the sky above me and lands on his head, and I was like, wow, he's not in a good spot there. And yeah, it turned out he cracked. Luckily it wasn't like a compound fracture. So it was the kind of fracture that could be raced and used quicker than, you know, one that breaks the skin or one that gets completely exploded. But you're talking here usually about MotoGP or a sport where you can grip the bike, grip the vehicle with your legs and actually take a bit of pressure off the front end and the upper body. And that's not the case in downhill. Downhill's all about the upper body essentially. And Amory came back and next race got himself in through Q2, last man in La Tuile, and then had a pretty good finals. Once the pressure was off, once he realised he could actually ride fast enough to still be competitive, put down a pretty solid finals in La Tuile, you know, next race out. So that was an insane performance. Luckily for Marine, unluckily she broke her back again, cracked a vertebrae again. She has her 3rd one in her career now, which is pretty scary. Luckily for her, it happened before the mid-season break, but to come back like she did and win races like she did was, yeah, pretty super impressive actually, and one of the ones that went under the radar because Marine herself is like not the most vocal rider, and in her English probably isn't the best. She doesn't get that limelight sometimes and that kind of like constant narrative on social media that some riders get. So for Marine to come back and do what she did was super impressive, you know, and for her to come back and do it again, having already done it previously in her career after a huge crash in Leogang a few years ago. It's super impressive. I'm not sure if was there any other, I can't remember off the top of my head if there was any other major standout comebacks.
I mean, Jackson was coming back from the previous season, but
no, that's so worthy of mentioning because not everyone comes back. Jordan Williams too was coming back from an ACL, but more time. But not everyone comes back to their best straight away from an ACL. Luckily, mountain biking, you don't injure your ACL very often. Jackson got super unlucky in that crash in the hardline when he did. We don't have many ACL injuries compared to like some sports like motocross or sports where your feet are on the floor. But yeah, Jackson came back, and I think a lot of people were like, oh, Jackson, Poland, that wasn't great. But he was sick that week. He had the flu or a really bad head cold or whatever it was, and energy levels weren't there for a track that just wasn't going to probably suit his strengths anyway. And then he came out swinging a couple of weeks later in Lutonville, and the rest is kind of history. Yeah, put the ACL behind him, absolutely no problem. So I think maybe it's worth mentioning that like Jackson dominated his junior career, came into elites and started winning straight away. You know, I didn't have it the easiest time ever coming into elites, like some ups and downs, but got the wins and put down some insane performances like his win in Val di Sole in his first year elite, and then got the injury, and then came back and did it all again and won more than ever. So that sort of trajectory, the ups and downs, as your phenom, as your racer and your kid who's grown up on social media, for him to do what you need to do in terms of coming back from injuries, that resilience is what makes a true world-class mountain biker. So for him to already do that's pretty special, you know. So that's going to be the litmus test for this next crop of juniors: how to deal with their first injury, how to deal with major setbacks, how to deal with not qualifying or not winning, if that's what they get used to doing for a period of time. That's that level of resilience that's required to kind of keep and solidify an elite career is that's what makes the man, as the saying goes.
Yeah, true. Before we wrap up, we should look ahead a little bit to 2026. Like, any predictions on what you think trends wise we might see? And we've talked in the past about thinking we'll see more track based engineers, which seems to have definitely become a thing. Like, are there trends that you're sensing in the sport? Yes.
And actually I talked about this with a pretty well-known pro rider a couple of days ago. And I didn't mention my feelings, my hunch on the trend of how things are going to go in terms of support and the direction the sport's going to take for a few years. But they basically had the same idea I had, which is that we're going to see a little period of stability for now, partially because budgets are going to be slightly constrained for a little bit, and people are just going to try and solidify, especially the teams that are already performing well. They're going to try and, make small changes to those good performances and keep the good staff they have, pay staff more. So I think we're going to see less radical change, less radical maybe signings, less huge shakeups like we had the last couple of years. Probably not going to see as many satellite teams starting up again, which, previously I thought maybe we'll see this cycle of like get rid of the satellite teams, the smaller teams, the B teams, then get them back because we want to keep these riders. That's probably not going to happen now. I think it's probably going to be a case of we're going to keep our big teams. We're going to do different ways of supporting and funding talent at the lower levels, at the younger levels, to funnel talent into the top end of the sport. And then people are really going to try and pay their key staff better, pay their key staff consistently. Keep your race engineers if you have race engineer, hire a race engineer if needed, potentially, but that's easier said than done with the level of expertise that's out there in the field. And keep riders healthy and keep them fast. And if you can't keep them healthy, you can't keep them fast. So coaches, physios, good mechanics, good accommodation, nice travel schedules. So I think that the sport's going to, infrastructure wise, support wise, it's going to stabilize and probably solidify for a couple of seasons. People are going to try and keep doing the good things they're doing and build on the good things they're already doing. And then in terms of the thing that people love, which is the tech, the bikes, I think we're going to see a continued just push to make bikes easier to ride fast, and that's what you need. You know what I mean? Like we saw with our microsector analysis from Lake Placid, where the race was really up and down in terms of who was strong and weak where. But when you're weak, you can't be insanely weak, because if you are really, really weak compared to someone who's strong in a particular sector and a particular type of track, you're not going to get anywhere near winning the race. You need to be, even though the differences we saw in Lake Placid versus the best person in each sector can be quite stark when you graph them out and you put them, graphically on a page, the margins can be actually quite small. And if you're not able to keep those margins small through advancements in tech and stuff, then you're probably going to be left slightly dead in the water. So we're definitely still going to see some push on the tech side of stuff. Tires, wheels, suspension, the main things. And my hunch is that electronic suspension might take a little back seat in the next few years. I think it's getting pushed pretty hard now. Guys like Bruni are way ahead in terms of, performance, in terms of how long they've been using it and how well they know it, how many iterations of the same product they've had. So, but he had his issues in Kilmurray with, suspension issues, maybe not related to electronics, I don't know. And I know some other teams that have been using electronic suspension this year had some big ups and downs in terms of how it impacted their performance. So we'll probably see a continued push in terms of trying to make electronics work and be a net benefit for everyone. But my hunch is that maybe riders are going to go, you know what? I can make my legs stiff. When I make my legs stiff, it'll be fine. You know what I mean? Like the effort that goes into winning a race run, physically, cognitively, all the rest now, maybe it's just best left to a really good bike that's really good in most places, not everywhere, you know? So
yeah.
we'll see. I could be wrong on that, but that's my hunch at the moment.
Yeah. One last question then, before we finally wrap up for 2025. What was your standout race run of this year? And you can only have one.
Yeah, you put me on the spot multiple times about this already, didn't you? It's the hardest question ever. I don't want to be like I don't want to be, what's the word, cliche? Is it cliche? I don't need cliche and be like, Tanni Poland. Tanni Poland was insane. But honestly, if I'm actually honest, Till Alleran's Latwil race run still, for whatever reason, stands out. You know what I mean? Phenomenal. You know, could Asa put down an insane run at Latwil? Max, Till's brother, crashed, having ridden a bike better than I've ever seen anyone ride a bike in Sector 1 in Latwil. But for whatever reason, Till's race run, just the way he got it done was phenomenal. Like right on the cusp of risk in many places, but still in control. And in a section of track, which was Sector 3 on that track, where a lot of people really struggled to be consistent all week. So if you look at the sector performances in Sector 3 in Latwil, a lot of people struggled to figure out how to ride it consistently fast through time training, qualies, Q2 finals. Till was just dominating all week and dominated again in finals. So really, I think closest to my heart is Tanni's Poland race run, because that was just meant so much to the whole team, to Orbea, to everything, to all of the work we put in. And it was a phenomenal race run, one of her best, maybe the best of her career. So for me, that was a huge one. But in terms of like watching race runs for as long as I watch race runs, analysing race runs for as long as I watch race runs, Junior somehow did it. Till, credit to you.
Yeah, for me, it was an Auran brother, but the other Auran brother, Max, in Leger in the wet.
Yeah,
the flow he had down that track was something else. I think
that race run is like indicative of the future. When we get those sorts of conditions, or the track is that hard, like we said, like statistically, that was the hardest track of the year. You know, no one got close to performing consistently across the sectors, really, except a couple of guys, Amory and Ronan, in the elite men's. In the elite women's, no one performed consistently. Tanni was super fast at the top, threw it away at the bottom. Gracie was super fast at the bottom, not at the top, and everyone else threw it away, so she dominated the race. That was a hard race. Like time-wise, it was long. It was too long, essentially, for downhill race because of how slow it was. Consistency-wise, it was hard to be consistent, and Max Alleran just stood up. He just stood there and operated. But having said that, he did that wild gap in the Fairies off Camber section. There was so many moments in that race when you're like, wow. So I think actually, when we look at it, Asa's dominance in Mont Saint-Anne, fastest man of the day, that's going to be something he can do again very soon on that type of track. Max's dominance, fastest man of the day in Leger, is something in those sorts of conditions. Doesn't have to be wet and muddy, but that sort of demand when everyone else is like, wow, this is so hard, I'm on, off, back and forth. That sort of demanding track is when Max will just be like, yep, how are you doing? And then Till, when you don't expect it, very similar to Rosa Ziel, I think, when you don't expect it, he'll just be like top step or close to it, you know, him and Rosa. So I think no, junior wise, because we're going to probably finish this like we started yapping about the juniors. Junior wise, no one's going to dominate, but when the right conditions show themselves, there's going to be a couple of juniors that are going to go like, hi, there you go. That's how you do it.
It's going to be good, man. Yeah, well, 2025 was an insane season. Thanks for keeping me company in all the pre-race shows throughout the year, and thanks for hopping on and doing this. It sounds like 2026 is going to be next level. Kind of wish it was coming sooner, but there we go. Yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Have a happy new year, and happy new year to all the listeners as well, because this is going to come out just before the 1st of January. But yeah, we'll catch you on the flip side for some pre-race for a race in Korea for the first time.
Yeah, I'm excited. Definitely excited to go to Asia, so it's going to be super cool. Yeah, nice. Korea is an amazing place. I was there probably 10 years ago, and it's beyond amazing. So I'm excited for Korea. And before you know it, if this podcast comes out a little bit later in December, before you know it, we're going to Korea. So yeah,
happy days. Nice one. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.